Our closing conversation has an intriguing title, From Listening to Action, Stories from the Storytellers. This session has been designed so that we can step outside the world of philanthropy for a moment and listen to stories that will be told in voices that we may not have heard or we may not have heard very often, but are nevertheless very much a part of the Canadian experience. To lead us through the session, we're going to invite our own PFC board member, Andrea Nemtin, who's also the leader of Inspirit Foundation, to return to the stage, well, has returned to the stage with her guests, Zarqa Nawaz and Tracy Deer.
Merci. And well done, everyone. I just want to say, well done, you're still here. And it's been a big day. I know that we've been doing a lot of listening. I hope we've been doing a lot of learning. You have until tomorrow to the action piece, I think, maybe next week. When Hillary first asked me if I was interested in moderating this panel, it took me about 2.5 seconds. Anyone who knows me knows that I have a passion for the power of media to affect social change, to affect attitudes, understanding, and actually behaviors. And so it's my true pleasure to introduce Tracy and Zarqa. And I'm going to give you their full bios because I think that really it's good to know who we're listening from, and they're so accomplished. Zarqa created the world's first sitcom about Muslim community, and not just any Muslim community, but one that's actually living in the prairies. So, you know, I can just imagine how the pitches went, right? Sitting there with the TV exec, no, really, people will be interested. They'll want to watch this. And they did. Millions and millions of people, record-breaking audiences for Little Mosque in the Prairie. It started in 2007, and I think it's been a real game changer in a number of ways. It's been seen all over the world. This show demystified Islam for millions, and by explaining how practicing Muslims live their lives from dating to marriage to burying their dead, and all with an accessible comedic approach. So both of these women take very, very challenging subjects and allow us to engage with them through comedy. And so this is going to be a fun panel. Now Zarqa has written a best-selling comedic memoir, which I've read, and you should all read, Laughing All the Way to the Mosque, about growing up Canadian of Muslim faith. And here it says, you were not beaten or stoned, but alas, she may have had the most boring, she may be the most boring Muslim on the planet, which is entirely not true. I've spoken to this woman. But your stories about going to Muslim summer camp are pretty funny, and many of the other ones are too. So just to say, Zarqa will be around. She'll be signing her books after this panel, so I invite you all to engage with her. You're a frequent public speaker, and you speak on Islam and comedy, gender and faith, and diversity in the media. So welcome. And Tracy Deer, to her right, award-winning Mohawk filmmaker with multiple credits, both as a producer, writer, a director in both documentary and fiction. You began your career in documentary, and there was a really powerful short that I watched, I think it was on the NFB website, with the sandbox. So remind me the name?
Crossing the Line.
Crossing the Line. And I'd invite you all to check it out. It's really poignant and short and just very, very moving. So you teamed up with Resolution Pictures for feature documentaries, and there's quite a few of them. One More River, The Deal That Split the Cree, Mohawk Girls, Club Native, as well as the documentary series Working It Out Together. And there's 2 seasons. And production in Canada, if you actually get 2 seasons, that in itself is an incredible accomplishment. The collaboration has continued into fiction television with what we'll be hearing about today, Mohawk Girls, the series which you co-created, direct and executive produces with creative partner Cynthia Knight, and it's been very critically acclaimed. It's called a dramedy. I haven't, dramedy. Okay, good. You now have your own production company as well, Mohawk Princess Pictures, and recently produced a feature documentary, Sex, Spirit, Strength, and the youth documentary series, Dream Big. Both are on APTN. And your work has been honored with 2 Gemini Awards, which are now the Canadian Screen Awards. So these are the Canadian Oscars, as well as numerous awards from multiple film festivals, hot docs. It goes on. She's worked with CBC and the NFB, numerous independent production companies throughout Canada in both documentary and fiction. And once they changed the name, you were also nominated for the Canadian Screen Award for the Best Direction in a Comedy Series for your work in Mohawk Girls. And I think that Little Mosque was also nominated for a Gemini at one point I read. So we've got really the cream of the Canadian independent production community here today. And so you're currently in post-production on the 5th season of Mohawk Girls, which is remarkable, and have multiple projects in development, including new dramedy series and multiple features, including Beans, a coming-of-age story of a Mohawk girl during the Oka crisis, inspired by your own experience. So I'm going to just start. I think that I've heard that being a comedian is one of the most challenging roles. I know that being an independent producer is one of the most challenging roles. I also know that engaging Canadians in conversations around truth and reconciliation and Indigenous peoples in Canada and around Islamophobia and the Muslim experience in Canada is challenging. So we kind of have a triple threat here. What was it that brought each of you, we'll start with this, to do this work? Why, first, thank you for doing it. And second, was there a moment when you knew that this is what you were going to do? Let's start with you, Tracy.
Sure. Wow, when you put it out like that, I'm exhausted. That's so many. That's a lot of challenges. But I would throw into there also the challenge of being a woman in today's society, but also in the entertainment business, but also being an Indigenous woman in this society and in the entertainment business. So, yeah, I'm feeling pretty proud of myself up here at this moment.
Good.
So for me, where it all began, I was 12 years old, living in Ganawage on the reserve, and I had just lived through the Oka crisis, which was, you all know about the Oka crisis? Awesome. So it very highly traumatic event for a little girl to grow up in, and this is really the event where I learned that I was different than everyone else, and that was not really that great. Up until that point, I had forts, and I played in the mud, and I colored, and I played tag. I had no idea that I was different. After that summer, I sunk into a depression, and I had post-traumatic stress. Of course, not diagnosed until 20 years later. But it was also the same time when commercial VHS players came on the market. And we couldn't afford one because they were $2,000 at the time, but we could rent a VHS player. We had a little video store on the reserve, and every weekend my father would rent a VHS player, and he would rent a stack of movies up to here. And all we would do, it was just so cool. We would sit in our basement and watch movies. In the morning, it was me and my sister watching the cartoons. In the afternoon, it was the family movies. And then in the evening, we got kicked out so they could watch the more adult-themed movies. And this lasted, everyone was so excited about it for about a month. But after that, the novelty wore off, and my sister would watch one, and my mother would watch one. But me and my father, we would just continue to watch. And for me, it was an escape. It was a way to go somewhere else, to be someone else. I was able to put myself in the position of those characters that I was watching, and the pain that they were going through, or the fear that they were going through, or the sadness they were going through. I allowed myself to feel those feelings through them because I didn't give myself permission to feel them for myself. And it was in that time that I also started dreaming about what I want to be. And what I wanted at the time was to get as far away as possible from where I was from, and really to get away from who I was born. I didn't want it. And so every movie I would watch, I would think, oh my gosh, I want to be Sean Connery and go to the Amazon and find the cure for cancer. And I would tell my parents, this is what we're going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And after a few days, once I thought about it, I realized I don't want to pee in the woods. I'm afraid of snakes, and I'm going to miss my mom. So every few movies, my dream changed until I realized if I made these movies, I could experience every single one of these stories, and maybe the stories I tell will inspire the young girl sitting in the basement to want to be the person to find the cure for cancer, who will not be afraid of snakes and peeing in the woods and missing their mom. And that's when it hit me. So I was 12 when I went to my parents and said, I really have it figured out this time. I want to make movies, and I haven't deviated from that path since then.
Fantastic. Thank you. What did they say?
Well, every few days I was coming up with a new dream, and every single time they said, okay, honey, that's great.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
And I actually was very, very nervous to tell my parents that I wanted to be a filmmaker, because even then, the notion that that's crazy. I mean, how do you do that, and who does that, and you don't make money doing that. And I so didn't want to disappoint them. And my mother, this is the reason I am here actually, is my mother, it's all because of my mother. Ever since I was a little girl, she's prepared me for every single challenge. She told me, don't let anyone ever stop you. You can go all the way. And there's been a lot of doors.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I love my mom so much. Oh. And I'm so grateful that she gave me those messages as a child over and over. I mean, she was militant about it. And we have to do that, because there are so many other messages out there to tell you that you're worthless, you won't go anywhere, you're a drain on society, you're going to be an alcoholic, there's something wrong with you. And it's very easy. I see it with my people all the time. It's very easy to, if that's all you're hearing, to start to believe it. Yeah. So I had my mother's voice in my head at all times telling me, nope, prove them wrong.
Yeah.
And she's the reason I'm here and doing what I'm doing.
Thank you. If she's still with us, please thank her for us. Okay. Thank her for me.
I will.
Because that's so crucial. And I know that for you, Zarqa, just from reading your memoir, the encouragement to go into film probably wasn't quite as strong.
No, I mean, it's so interesting listening to your story. Can everyone hear me? Yep. This is good. So my background is similar but different, in the sense that my parents came to Canada in 1972. So I was born in Liverpool, England, and was 5 years old when my parents decided to come to Canada. And this was sort of a traditional migratory pattern for a lot of South Asians, because England was the first route which was allowing South Asians from Pakistan and India, because they were looking for educated, immigrants to come and help rebuild the country. And my father was actually part of building the Mersey tunnels in Liverpool. For those of you who are familiar, there's not. I don't even know what a Mersey tunnel is, but it defines my life. I was born in the Mersey Hospital in Liverpool, and then the doors of immigration started to close, and Canada took advantage and said, hey, they actually sent immigration officials to England and started poaching the immigrants and saying, if you come to our country, we'll give you citizenship and jobs and access, to a different land. And so my parents moved to Toronto, and that's where I grew up. And of course, the number one occupational dream of every immigrant dad is medicine. So that was ingrained in me since I was like an embryo, that I would only ever be one thing, and that was a doctor. And like, I'm talking about obsession, you guys. Like, I'm talking about, there was no other career option open to me. And my father came from a really traumatic background, because he was born in a time, he was only 15 when India and Pakistan, the British colonialists had decided to split the country into, India, Hindu India, and Muslim Pakistan, because, my father had said for centuries, Muslims and Hindus had lived in relative peace with each other. And then when the British colonialists came in with their divide and conquer policy, they created enmity between people and of different faiths. And my father said overnight, when that decision had been made, neighbors who had lived together for centuries started killing each other. And they had to, it was the largest human migration at that time, where our family lived in India and had to be loaded into to refugee camps and then put on trains and then sent to Pakistan. And my father said many times, those trains were stopped and people were slaughtered wholesale on those trains and never made it. So it was a very bloody and violent time for him. And he was only 15. He had lost relatives and family. And when he made it to Pakistan, they had lost land and jobs and all economic opportunity. And so they were going to go into indentured poverty. And he realized very quickly the only thing that would keep them afloat was education, that he would have to educate himself very rapidly. And he was the eldest son, and the culture of that time is the eldest son takes care of everybody. And he got scholarships, became an engineer, a civil engineer, and then moved to England, where they were looking for engineers. And he would send money home and raise all the other brothers and sisters. And then, the village was like, is he ever eventually going to have his own life? And so then he got a telegram. This is back in the day of when there were no phones and things for overseas phone calls. And they said, your father's dying. And he came back to Pakistan only to be greeted by a band and a wedding and a shiny new bride. This is what we call old school arranged marriage, where you don't even know you're getting married. And so he brought back his bride to England, but he became obsessed with education, and I was his only daughter. And so, it was really strange to be raised by a very conservative Pakistani man who was obsessed with education, because he had gone back home and he'd seen all his sisters get married very young, because at that time period, for their safety, they would marry women very young, so they would be in a family and they would be safe. But he believed in his heart that if women were educated and were financially independent, they would never need to get married, because marriage was only for financial security, and if a woman had her own financial security, hence there was no need for men or marriage. That would you could just exit, you could excise that from her life.
And you could be his little girl forever.
So he believed men and marriage were for women who failed in life, right? And if you succeeded in education, you would never need that part, because he always felt that whenever he met an educated woman, he would say, so why did you stop getting your, if you had a BSc, why did you not get your master's? And it would always because she got married and had children. And so for him, it was because she got married, right? Every point in a woman's life where her career stopped seemed to be marriage and children. And so he was like, don't get married, don't have children, just get educated, and you will never ever need to get married. And it was a really strange way of growing up. My mother, of course, did not believe her life was a failure, right? And so I was trying to live his dreams, become a doctor. And when I got to university, I had the grades in high school, but I couldn't keep up that passion for organic chemistry and physics, and I couldn't calculus. I just couldn't do it. And then my marks started to drop, and then I was like, oh my God, there's medical school boards who will not let you in based on your father's dream for you, right? They don't care that you've dreamt your whole life to be one thing. They're like, no, we're impartial. We just look at a piece of paper with your grades, and you just don't meet our expectations. And so I didn't get in, and it was the single most devastating thing in my life, because I thought, you're going to fail your father. Plus, you don't know what to do. You literally don't know what to do with the rest of your life. And then a friend of mine, my best friend, was always talking about making films and writing novels and making plays. And that to me was that sexy, forbidden career that good Muslim girls didn't do, right? But my mother, who was always in the wings waiting, for something to fall apart in my life so she could go with her plan B, which had always been marriage, right? Because she did not... Because she did not believe in my father's plan that getting married was the worst thing that ever happened to you. And she was grieving for my embryo, for my ovaries, which were shriveling, right? And I was like mid-20s, which meant I was in peril, right? Desperate peril. And so suddenly young men started showing up in our living room. And so it's like this Pakistani network of aunties who conveniently have all these, young men who Pakistan sends a lot of PhD students to the US to get their PhDs, and they just need a citizenship with benefits and they can stay in the continent. And so they were quite happy to marry me without knowing who I was. And I was like, no, I'm not ready to be a housewife in Karachi just yet. And so I applied to the Ryerson School of Journalism, and Stuart McLean was my teacher. Stuart McLean. He taught me how to write story. He was, at that time period, he taught radio broadcast. It's so good to talk to an audience who knows who he is, right? Because when I talk to high school students, I'll have to say, well, he was like the Jean Gomeshi without the weird sexual stuff, right? And from there, it was like this whole new world of writing story, and the fact that I could do this thing and I could take my people and my culture and the fusion with, you know, what was happening in the world. Like the first film I made was in 1990, I have to think, right, because my kid was born in 94, and she was 1. So in 1995, there was a terrible attack in the United States where a man drove a truck into the Alfred P. Murrah building, and it exploded, and 167 people were killed, and everyone said it was Muslim terrorists. And I remember the Toronto Star had pictures of Muslim terrorists, and they were all, you know, they were being interrogated and taken off planes. And I think 2 or 3 days later, Timothy McVeigh, a white guy who was a white supremacist who was trying to bring down the American government, was indicted. And I thought, wow, you know, there's this whole other world, you know, of white terrorism that we don't even see or recognize because we're so focused on the brown other that we missed it. And so that was when I made my first comedy called Barbecue Muslims. And it was based on that whole incident in history where, you know, these 2 Muslim brothers are sleeping one night and a barbecue blows up in their backyard, and they're immediately accused of being Middle Eastern terrorists. And they're like, we've never even been to the Middle East. And the real terrorists are the barbecue anti-resistant front who are blowing up barbecues because they think that the carbon is going to cause global warming. They were ahead of their time. And they're picketing in front of the police station going, no, it's us. We did it. And you know, his partner's like, why would you blow up a Muslim's barbecue? And he's like, I didn't know. Barbecues are not labeled according to the faith group who owns them. They're ecumenically neutral in suburbs. They just sit there unlabeled, like without crosses or, you know, stars of Davids on them. We don't, we just blow them up. And if we had just known that a Muslim owned us, we never would have done it, right? So it was my commentary on stereotypes of one community and how it overrides, you know, an entire other community. And it's not until, I would say, President Trump was elected that there's been an incredible swivel of the media to another, you know, this other group of, you know, militias and, you know, Nazis and white supremacists that are causing huge terror in the United States that we were not aware of for decades because we were only focused on, you know, the threatening other and convinced that this was where we needed to focus our energies on. And this was like 1995 I had made this film. And so I feel like in a form, art, like making art for me is a form of therapy in a way that I can process what's going on in this world and how my people and my culture and my religion are being demonized, and being able to take that and turn it around and get people to understand the damage that it can cause, you know, a whole generation of people. And we've seen what happened in Quebec. We're here in January. If you have so much hate focused on for so long on one group of people, how it can explode. And you know, and to me, I feel like, you know, coming here, I have a confession to make. I travel a lot, and I get confused when I travel where I'm going. So for the longest time, I was telling my family I'm going to the Philharmonic Foundation of Canada. And my husband's like, are you sure? Because I don't know why they would invite you. I'm like, you know, people invite me, and I don't know. So it was a big revelation when I got here. And I started listening to all the stories, and I was like, oh. So this was, and then I suddenly realized that what you're doing in terms of funding arts and theater and novelists and writers and young people can change the world. Because if someone hadn't taken me when I was making that transition from medicine to film, it was the, you know, at that time period, it was the arts boards of Canada that were filling the holes, and they were funding people like me, and I was making these goofy little films like Barbecue Muslims, you know, because it was my, I shot it at my parents' house with my family, so you know, like the guerrilla type of filmmaking. It was terrible, right? Like it was just, and of course, I thought it was worth an Oscar, so I submitted it to the Toronto International Film Festival, and they were like, oh my God. we are going to have to reject a technically perfect film for this, right? And I was like, why? What do you mean? They're like, it's just that no one has ever made a film, a satire about terrorism before. Like, nobody's ever taken this really difficult, hard topic and twisted it and made it accessible in this manner. And we are forced to program it, right? And it changed my life, because once you get programmed in a film festival like that, it opens up funding opportunities for so many other places and people. And it wasn't until I came here and realized there's so many people that care about people like us who want to hear these tiny stories, and you never know where a tiny story like that can lead. Because I mean, I had no idea that I would go from making these little snippets of my community's life to ultimately a television show, which ended up being exported around the world. And people are watching Little Mosque because, even though I made it for different reasons, they're watching it because they're looking at a history of multiculturalism that's working, which is not working for them. Because Muslims in the U.S. are in Europe is like, it's a disaster. Like, they have the highest rates of crime and the highest rates of unemployment, whereas in Canada it's very, very different. And part of it is because of our, policies that we have put into place, and it makes a difference in how, like someone like me, like when the immigration officials came to England, they said, we will give you citizenship. We will give your daughter, she can practice her faith the way she wants to. You'll have to have a sense of identity and belonging while still maintaining who you are. Makes a fundamental difference in how a human being can survive and view themselves. And that's not what's happening in places like Europe. And the difference between the two communities is devastating. And what's happened with First Nations communities, when you take away that sense of, ownership of their culture and their history and their spirituality, when you strip a people of that, it's like the results are utterly devastating for generations. And you can see this is where I bring it, the parallels of what has happened to First Nations. You can see what's happening to Muslims in Europe, right? Yeah. And we have to see that and acknowledge that and realize the storytellers are the healers of our community, and it's important to know how valuable that is to people's lives. Yeah. That was a long-winded answer.
I'm going, what did I just do? I just turned this off. How do I turn it back on? There we go. I want to show you a little bit of a sample, Little Mosque on the Prairie, so we can actually see what this looks like in action. This is an interactive show. Not interactive, but videos. Let's see.
Finally, our own mosque. No more shuffling around from one basement to another. Well done, Yasser.
A small town mosque in a church.
I don't understand why you didn't just tell them about the mosque. Yeah.
Yes, this is a good one. Reverend, I would like to run a mosque out of your parish hall. Would you like to tell Jesus, or shall I?
A new imam from the big city.
I've been planning this for months. It's not like I dropped a bomb on him. This is Allah's plan for me.
Oh my.
American Idol. Canadian Idol. I say all idols must be smashed.
Hey, did you tape last night's episode? Oh, it was so good.
What could possibly go wrong?
Step away from the bag. You're not going to paradise today.
Allahu Akbar.
I saw them bowing and moaning just like on CNN.
They're Muslims. They pray 5 times a day.
Yeah, is this terrorist attack hotline?
You got people walking down Main Street in burqas. Next thing you know, you got public beheadings and people eating figs.
Muslims around the world are known for their sense of humor.
I did not know that.
What is your relationship with this mosque?
I'm Omar Rashid. I'm the new imam. It's like a priest or a rabbi, only browner.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Yasser Hamoudi. And this is my wife, Sarah, my beautiful daughter, Rayan.
This is Rayan.
Welcome to our little mosque on the prairie.
Would it kill you Muslim gals to show a little cleavage now and then?
Would it kill you if I hit you with a cleaver?
Canada's highest rated comedy premiere.
So?
You look like a Protestant.
Don't you mean prostitute?
No, I meant Protestant.
91 episodes over 6 extraordinary seasons.
Well, I thought you'd drag us into the modern world, or at least the 11th century.
You have to help me.
My congregation's coming apart at the seams.
No.
Use your muscles. In Pakistan, we can move 10 women at a time.
A worldwide success story.
Any words of wisdom? No, not really. No.
I've never prayed so much in my life.
So these are big issues. Each of you coming from this, the resilience that it takes to transform the experience of your family's history and the challenges that you're facing every day into this comedy for all of us is remarkable, really. And I think it shows how much easier it is to engage with these really deep and challenging topics when you're willing to do that. I mean, that's very generous, actually, in my view, to be able to engage us and entertain us on something that is so essential. I'm going to also show you a clip of Mohawk Girls, because there are some similarities. Oh, I turned it off again. Sorry, it's late. Here we go. And this is, look at these women, fantastic.
You're Italian? I love Italy. We're native.
No way. How? Me come in peace.
What did you just say?
Well, I guess she's one of the angry ones.
Dude, that is a stupid stereotype. Our people have been through a lot, so yeah, sometimes we get mad about it.
I get that. You know, everyone thinks all of us Italians are mafiosi.
You're not?
So, you guys like 100%?
Did I ask if you were 100% Italian? I bet not all your family is from Italy, right? So what does that make you? Nothing? I'll tell you what that makes you. 100% jerk.
Guess you're all angry after all.
So that one, thank you. So if anybody's been in the dating scene recently, that one can resonate on a number of different ways. And, I want to just ask you guys, you've shared a little bit about your personal experience that brought you to these conversations. And I think it's important for us to actually know, we're sort of looking at these things through a light lens, through a comedic lens, but what are the actual impacts if we do not engage in truth and reconciliation through different ways? What are the actual real what's really at stake here,
Well, I mean, we've been living it, and let me tell you, it's bleak. The headlines you see, the small snippets in the news with sad stories coming from my community across the country, that is a piece of our reality. And unfortunately, that's often all you hear. The thing is, that stuff is all really true. So I advocate, we need to be known fully, and the context of where we come from and why these terrible things are happening needs to be known in order for us to together come up with solutions. But all those sad, terrible stories you hear, that's what's at stake. Like, my people have been living it now for too long, so that's why we absolutely need to shake it up, change our perspective, open our mind, open our hearts, and come together to work on this together. It's not our problem to fix, because I'm going to point to all of you, just because you represent Canada, but this country is responsible for the problems that we are living in, and so it's not our responsibility to fix it. Together, we need to fix it. So that is what is at stake.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that, Zarqa, do you want to add to that? Because I think that one of the things that both of you are doing in engaging with these solutions is that you end up being a bridge between both worlds, right? You're translating, when we first spoke, I think you each mentioned that you had created this both to reflect, to talk to the Indigenous community you grew up with, to talk to the Muslim, to show Muslims about themselves, to reflect back to them. So, the real goal is to see yourself and your community as part of this fabric of the media that we are all consuming, but then also to engage non-Indigenous and non-Muslim Canadians. What personal cost is that bridging? Do you pay a price for that? I know you do, Tracy. I've heard your podcast. So I don't know if you're welcome to speak first. And I don't want to take this lightly. You know, I think that especially in our role as funders, we often we cannot ever overestimate the price of the work, the price of the individuals who are actually engaging in addressing the issues that we have on our strat plans. And it must bring up some challenges with your communities.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm very close to tears again. Good
Sorry,
job.
I know, I'm sorry, Tracy. That's why I was going to give you a break and let Zarqa answer first.
I never cry on set, just to be clear. When I'm on set doing my job, I'm not a mushball. But when I get up and I'm able to talk to people one-on-one and share my work and talk about my work, it is really emotional for me. And I feel so fortunate to be doing what I'm doing because I want to be a part of positive change. You know, what happened to me as a 12-year-old girl, I never want that happening to another little girl. I don't want that message out there. Dang. But in terms of the cost, so that was the first reason that the tears came up, because it's really hard. My biggest fans are my own people, but my biggest critics are my own people. And there are many that don't like the show, don't like what I'm talking about, they accuse me of making us look bad. I counter by saying, I am not making us look bad. If there's anything that you don't like, this is our reality. We then are responsible for making ourselves look bad. If you don't like what you see, then let's talk about it and do something about it. But putting our head in the sand and pretending it's not there, that is not the way to a better life. But it is very hard. I mean, I still live in Kahnawake. The show is all about Kahnawake, and I still live there. I still have a home there. So any given day, when I'm out and about in the community, I have no idea when I run into people who thinks I'm great and who hates me. And it is really hard. Yeah. But I love what I'm doing, and I feel good about what I'm doing, and that is worth more than that discomfort, because I do want to make a difference. And I just want to add to what I said earlier. It's not about blame. You know, after I said what I said, I want to make it clear that it's not blame. And it's about being allies. And that's for me what the show is and what everything I do is about. It's about wanting to build a bridge, wanting to find a friend, to show that we are more similar than we are different, and we need you. So I hope comedy, I feel like comedy is the way to get into your homes, get into your hearts, to build that bridge.
Yeah. Thank you.
And it's worth it. It is worth it for me if I can build even just little bridges. I feel good about what I'm doing here in this earth right now.
Thank you. And Zarqa, do you have a similar? Is there a lot of criticism?
Oh yeah, when I was listening to Tracy, I was like, oh my God.
Are you gonna cry too?
No. I was gonna offer her my Kleenex, but it's used, and I was like, my Kleenex is over there. And I think I'm already driving the sound guys crazy by touching my headscarf where my mic is, right? Stop touching my scarves. They're giving me these daggers. When Little Mosque came out, I thought the community was going to be so happy, right? Because finally a positive portrayal, right? It's going to be great. And then they went ballistic, and and they actually and it's been years since I've been able to talk about this. They actually there was a petition, and they signed it, and they said this show does not represent us, and she's shaming us. They sent it to the CBC, who were like agog, right? They were like, what's happening? Right? And it took me years to process, like, what is happening? Because in their minds, we had always been on television as the terrorists, the oppressors, the people who are going to destroy Western civilization. What they wanted was the Pollyannish version of their community, where they're perfect and they don't make mistakes and they're wonderful neighbors and they cut their lawn and they take care of the poor. And I was like, yeah, except that's kind of not who we are, right? And plus that's called propaganda, and I'm not sure the CBC would allow that on television. Plus it's terrible entertainment. No one would watch it. We never make it, past
It'd be
first.
kind of boring.
Yeah, it would be really boring. But they couldn't see that, right? They're like, no, if you show us with warts and all, then people are going to hate us even more. And then we'll be in a worse position than we are. And they were quite angry with me, and they had ostracized myself and my family. And my poor little son, who was so little, he must have been like 9, and he came home from the mosque one day, and he sat down beside me, and he held my hand. He goes, Mom, I have something to tell you. People don't like you in the mosque. And the poor little guy, right? Like, he had to tell people, that's my mom you're talking about. Wow. And it took years for the community to come around, because what they were expecting it to be disastrous. And what ended up happening was, over the years, non-Muslims would come up to them and say, oh my God, that episode of when you tried to get rid of the president of your association, that was just like what we did in our church, or what we did in our synagogue, or what we did in our soccer association last week. We did the exact same things as you guys, and we have the same people, and we have the same personalities. And what was happening was that people were realizing that even though the setting was in a mosque, and these were, 6 Muslim characters, the things that Muslims do were the same things that everybody else, as humans, do in a community, and there's nothing that we do that is any worse than what everyone else is doing. And essentially the show was about human beings doing universal things, and it was humanizing us.
Yeah.
So showing us making those mistakes and doing all those things that are considered bad was not making us look bad, it was actually giving us a human face for the first time ever.
Well, right, making us 3-dimensional people.
That have the
we
same
laugh,
issues.
we fall in love, we get our heart broken, we hate our mothers, yeah.
So people didn't think that, like Muslims didn't think that showing those warts and all would actually be a good thing. And it ended up being a good thing, because what people wanted was just an honest conversation about what your life is really like. And it turns out our life isn't any different than your life. And remember, the CBC was always like, give me more Muslim-y things, give me more exotic things, give me more things that are so weird, because that's where people are gravitating. And I ran out after a while. I'm like, there's nothing left at the end of the day. We're the same as you, right? Yeah. And it was a revelation for me, because you think that your own community are the biggest whack jobs on the planet. Like, nobody can beat us when it comes to weirdness. But no matter what the situation was on the show, somebody would always come and tell me a story that was stranger, that had happened, that was even weirder. Like, you think you don't celebrate Halloween, when in our church, we did that such and such during Halloween. And it was so interesting to me that you can't come up with the weirdest story. Somebody else can beat you to it. And that you don't own it. Right? That these are human issues, and these are universal issues, and these people are just people. People are just people. If you scratch below the surface, we are all essentially the same. And that's where the racists who don't want to convince us that, no, these people are unique and different, and they're going to destroy us. And it's like, you can't actually prove that. If you go right down to the core of whatever story you tell about my community, I can find in your community. And, and so that was a revelation for both myself and my community. And it took years for them to say, and even now I get nervous when I meet Muslims, because I don't know where they stand in terms of viewing me. Because comedy is not always transferable to all generations in all cultures. It really depends on their outlook and where they've grown up. And for a certain generation in my community, making fun of religion is not a good thing. And it was really upsetting to them. And I had an Indonesian man who came up to me and he goes, listen, I cannot understand a word of your show, but my son watches it and he laughs at everything. He goes, just promise me you're not making fun of God, right? Just promise me this one thing. And I said, I promise you I'm not, right? I'm making fun of you maybe, but not God. And that was the issue for them, because they feel they represent God. Thus, if I'm making fun of them, it must translate to God, right? A direct connection. And so those were things that I had to learn the hard way.
So I asked Zarqa and Tracey to send me one of their favorite clips. So the first clips we watched were to sort of look at how they were approaching these challenges. And so this is a very good example. I think it's a perfect segue into Jihad on Ice. Would you like to introduce it, or do you want me to just hit play?
Sure, I'll introduce it. I came up with this idea during the soccer debates in the early you know how young women who wanted to play soccer weren't allowed because they were wearing the hijab, and so they were banned and they were pulled off. And this is an issue that it's ongoing with all these sports. Should women be allowed to wear the hijab? And so it's strange, right? Like, people complain Muslim women or Muslims don't integrate. So then when Muslims integrate, they're like, no, we don't want you to integrate because you're wearing that on your head. So there are all these barriers to inclusion. So it was based on that issue where Muslims join a sport, and what was the most quintessential Prairie Canadian sport, which is curling. And I thought Muslims are going to try to curl. And I had to learn all about the curling rules and understand it. And of course, and it was about, if you watch the whole episode, it's about Ryan being kicked off the curling team because she's too good and they're looking for an excuse and they use the hijab. So it was my twist on that whole thing. That's great. So now she's been removed and they're trying to redeem, the game for her.
The best man win.
Well, how about a friendly little wager? If we win, the Ice Slammers hang up their brooms forever.
Gee, no more curling. What if we win?
Oh, I'll buy you a unicorn. That way you can get around Berry Gumdrop Land more easily.
How about you just don't say anything bad about Muslims on the radio?
That's my whole show.
For a week, then.
Deal.
Can win the game. We'll show Fred Muslims can curl. But I'm Anglican. Let me have my moment. Win.
We won! Muslims can't curl.
It's not our fault, he's Anglican.
Just a minute. The hog line is 2 inches too close to the backboards. According to page 178 of the curling manual, it should be exactly 37 feet. No more, no less.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me that these lines have been painted wrong all these years?
You care to check yourself, huh?
No, I trust you. Hey, the throw was good. Ice Slammers win.
Memorization is the key to winning.
He must have had to practice. We did curling in a staff event once. It's really hard.
It is?
Yeah, it's really hard. So thank you for that. And Tracy, I asked you she gave me 3, and I almost shared the one where they skinned a rabbit, but I just thought that might not go very well. So we're going to share, this is the powwow, and do you want to do a little introduction to this one?
Sure. So a powwow, for those of you that don't know, it's a celebration. We get together and we celebrate our culture, our dancing, our food, there's crafts, and it's a very big event back home in Ganawage. We have a powwow every summer to commemorate the Oka crisis and welcome people in to come and learn about us so that something like the Oka crisis will never happen again. And we have been wanting to do a powwow in the show every single season because it's a huge event. But every single season, we've had to cut the powwow out of the season. Like it didn't make it from script to production because it's a big, expensive set. So season 4, which we did last year, powwow finally stuck. And we made sure of it by making an entire episode all happening at the powwow. So you couldn't make a case that take out the 2 powwow scenes. It just wouldn't work. So this was a super, super proud moment for me. It was 2 days of shooting at our powwow, our made-up powwow. And the opening shot you're going to see here, one of my most favorite shots ever. And it was beautiful. The sun was setting. we had all these dancers, and I just saw the beautiful display of my culture, and that I was going to now be able to put that out into the Canadian television landscape for people to see. I was so, so proud to do that. So the scene you're about to see, it starts with one of my most favorite shots, and then it goes on to one of the characters exploring the powwow, and then she has, of course, the dramedy part. Then the mean girl comes and ruins it.
Spoiler alert.
Whoops.
Why I was excited to come to Powwow. You know, to learn and carry on our traditions.
So no straight dude will go near you now, huh?
What are you talking about?
Butterhead said that you're a dead fish in the sack.
He said what? What a little...
Forget about it. Who cares what he says?
Yeah, you're right.
So I just want to say, you know, just an observation in watching these clips. I don't watch a huge amount of television, but when I do, it's usually because I kind of, you know, I need some connection. I need some connection to characters that I love. And the thing that really, that I see in both of these is you have both created these really lovable, wonderful, complex characters and a whole sort of crew that you want to spend time with. And I just, you know, this is not an easy thing to do. It's a huge testament to actually who you are, because of course they came out of each of you. So thank you for that. And
they're my best friends.
Yeah, they're kind of,
they really are my best friends. I've been spending the last 6 years with them in my head, and they're going away. We're closing the season right now. So there's a big part of me that is saying goodbye to some of my best friends, or at least for now. You know, they're gonna sit there until maybe a very merry Mohawk Girls Christmas comes around.
It could be like Sex and the City and have
exactly some
every
movies.
years.
The first one will be great. The second one,
yeah.
And
the
then
third one, you really shouldn't have done it. Yeah. Thank you. You know, I think that for all of us, it's very clear to feel, even just in this short time, what these shows can do in terms of changing our attitudes, in terms of connecting us to these issues and to individuals and to people. And because we are in the business of philanthropy, of granting, of making change, and I like to do the resource slide, I've just put up a few places that have actually created measurement frameworks around what the power of media can do. The Norman Lear Center has done a huge amount of really rigorous academic study in how entertainment and documentary media can actually change attitudes and behaviors. The Active Voice Lab, which includes How Do We Know, is another place out in these are mainly US, not all, that actually looks at documentary rather than dramedy and comedy. But they have all kinds of resources, including sort of something they call the prenup for funders and media creators, conversations you should have to manage expectations and contracts if you want to fund these. How Do We Know, which is a whole impact framework to know whether you're making the difference. A Good Pitch is an international movement of philanthropists, foundations, social change nonprofits, and media creators that gather in cities around the world to actually fund media and their impact campaigns with social change as their goal. Harmony Labs is like big data. they actually have a process through which they can measure the way the narrative in society has changed around issues that the films are sort of are addressing. And then Bashari Films is this wonderful woman that I know in Toronto. They've just done a really impressive impact report, on their anti-poverty project called Low Down Tracks. And I think that this was actually funded by some people in the room. I think the Catherine Donnelly Foundation helped to fund this, and the Slate Family Foundation also contributed to this project around trying to address media. So this is the homework when you get into the action piece. So since each of you entered into this quite a while ago, you're on season 5, you started Little Mosque in 2007. And I know for myself, working around these issues, because coincidentally Inspirit works on reconciliation and Islamophobia, that the world things are changing very quickly on these issues. And it seems like they are changing faster and faster, that the demands of engaging with this, and it's both positive and negative. And I'm just curious to know if you want to tell us a little bit about what's next on your list. What's next for,
So as you've guessed by now, my comedy comes from what's happening internationally or nationally or locally. So the last 3 years, after I finished my memoir, in 2014, and in 2014 ISIS started, and naturally I was following them through comedy, right? Which I know is challenging. It was challenging, it was very challenging. And so I started writing a book, my first novel, about a young Muslim woman, maybe not so young, and she accidentally joins an ISIS-like group and ends up in Syria and brings them down through incompetence and becomes the first Westerner they've got to get rid of, right, before the group goes down. And, it's so interesting because I finished it, and and ISIS seems to, I think Raqqa fell yesterday. I was on my way here and I was reading reports. And so it's so interesting, that the journey of writing the book and finishing it. And of course I couldn't call it the group ISIS, right? So I had to come up with a pseudonym. So I came up with the Dominion of the Islamic Caliphate in Kingdoms. So the book is called The Rise and Fall of Dick, right? And I cannot tell my mom what I'm working on, right? Because everyone asks what's it called, and then you're like, oh, here we go, and you have to give this spiel. And so I just finished it, and hopefully there will be a publisher out there who will not consider it in terrible taste. And in the book, I did a lot of research over the years about how this group formed, the war, the Iraq War and the vacuums of power it created, and so the imperialism in the Middle East and what destruction it's wrought. And because people sort of think, oh, ISIS just emerged out of nowhere. These groups, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, they didn't emerge out of nowhere. There are symptoms of greater imperial interference and warfare, and that could have been prevented and have caused unimaginable horrors. I mean, one third of an entire nation's population in Iraq is either dead or injured or exiled from a war that didn't even have to happen, for weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. And so we see, the repercussions of the Syrian refugees and, people whose lives have just been disrupted in entire countries for reasons that didn't have to happen. And this group that formed. And so I did a lot of research in the background and sort of infused it with story and comedy to give us, because people need a sense of, where is this coming from? Why is this happening? And put it in context. Otherwise, the story is, oh, it's because they're Muslim, it's because they're their religion, because they're brown, and they just somehow want to destroy the world, and this is all they're capable of doing without taking this whole other chunk of history and recognizing it. I mean, the context, and it's crazy that the stuff that's missing. In my research, in Afghanistan, I was reading this in the New York Times of all places. There was a publishing house in Virginia that created a whole educational curriculum for young children in Afghanistan based on warfare, right? They wanted jihad to be the primary dictate of their faith, because it wasn't. And so, but they wanted it to be, so they would actually create books on how to learn the alphabet, and they would say J is, you know, I forget the language in Afghanistan, Pashtun is for jihad, or, you know, this is a primary force of my religion, this is a gun, you know, this letter is for a gun, my uncle goes and performs jihad because he is a good Muslim. So and these books were published in the United States and sent to Afghanistan and taught to an entire generation of children, so they would become militarized, so so the Americans could use them to fight their wars. And they changed the whole, you know, educational system to satisfy another nation's needs. And then afterwards said, oh, look at Muslims, they're so obsessed with jihad, not acknowledging where it came from, that these books, and you can still find them, they're trying to get rid of them in Afghanistan. And so no one acknowledges this whole history of what, you know, imperial interference and how it changed the whole mindset of kids, you know, to do what the Americans wanted them to do and create violent societies, and to say now, oh, they're so misogynistic, you know, the Taliban, and so you're like, where did they come from? Where did their mothers go? Where did their sisters go? Why do we have a whole generation of men who've grown up without women? Like, they're orphans of a war, right? And so we forget, you know, who caused that war, you know, the whole public policy that was enacted because of that war. And these are things that are missing from history that we need to know about. And to me, the best way to bring it forward is through story and comedy, because then people are willing to engage with history, and it becomes more accessible and more digestible, and then they're able to think. Like, you know, these horrors just didn't come out of nowhere. So that was a project that took about 3 years, and it followed the whole creation of ISIS and the whole history of and it took me that long to understand and put it in context. So I just finished it. So hopefully, pray for me that I will find a publisher, and that book hopefully will come out, and I'm thinking in the next 6 months to a year.
And then is the plan to make a movie?
I would love for it to be a movie or a Netflix series or something, turn it into something. But that is the goal. And I kind of needed, I know this sounds terrible, but I kind of needed ISIS to fall first. So I was like, not yet, right? Because I hadn't finished the book. But it worked out. So I think they are, you know, losing power rapidly, and because the whole book is sort of the whole cycle of their life cycle, so it worked out. So that's what I'm working on.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Tracy?
So I started my career in documentary for 10 years. I've been in television for about 6. And the one thing I haven't done yet is feature film, which is the original thing I fell in love with as a 12-year-old. So now I want to take on feature films, and I have 3 in development. One is the coming-of-age story of a young Mohawk girl during the Oka crisis. A second one is this remarkable true story of a woman who was sexually assaulted and left for dead in the woods out west, but she didn't die, and she survived in the woods for 12 days to make it back to her community and point the finger at her accuser and put him in jail. This is an Indigenous woman. And so for me, I'm so inspired by this woman and this story to be able to look at the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women, but she survived.
Yeah.
So that's another film. And then the third one is called Inner City Girl, and it's based on a book written by a young immigrant girl who moved to Winnipeg and was abused in her home and ended up finding refuge in an Aboriginal gang and befriended a very tough Aboriginal young girl in this gang. And the story follows sort of that lifestyle for a good year. And the book was written by a non-Aboriginal girl, and the producers wanted to bring on an Aboriginal director to fill in the other side of the story. So I'm really thrilled about that, and I'm excited about looking at that and looking at gang life, which is a huge problem in Winnipeg. But again, why? And to look at the context. You know, these are not criminals by birth. There's a reason that everyone has found each other and is lashing out in that way. So I'm excited to explore all of that. And again, but from the perspective of these 2 young women coming of age. They're more 16 years old. So I have a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old. and a 22-year-old woman with all of these incredible stories. So that's what's next for me.
Thank you. So I think we have about 2 minutes left. 2 minutes? I'm looking at my time. 1 minute left. Okay. So I'm just going to say, in preparation for this panel, I read Zarqa's book, and I was also driving on my way, I think, to Foundation House, and Metropolis was sharing a podcast on the radio, and it was Tracey was talking about Montreopolis, it's called actually. The podcast of you talking about your story and growing up and sharing your journey. And so if you want to spend more time and get to know, so doing that, I feel like I kind of really know them, and I got to spend a fair amount of time with them. And so what we have now is a break, which will give you a little bit of time during the reception to get to know them and to talk to them. But I also encourage you to spend some time listening to the podcast, reading the book. And it's really important when we say that we're going to listen, learn, and act. These are two ways in which you can actively listen and learn. And on that note, I would like to thank...
Can I add one thing? You forgot to say you could tune into Mohawk Girls.
And Mohawk Girls. Oh my goodness. What
It's very
more?
easy. You can go to mohawkgirls.com. All of the episodes are streamed online.
And Little Mosque is on iTunes.
Is it really?
Yeah. It is.
Good to know.
Because I had to, steal the logo, and it came up.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you.